Hey, this is Matthew Ellison, president at 1615. We are passionate about equipping the people of God for the mission of God. And one of the ways we do that is by providing Great Commission resources, just like the webinar you're about to watch today. We hope you are blessed by what you hear. If you have comments or questions, leave them right here.
Good afternoon and welcome to our peer-to-peer meeting for church mission leaders. My name is Carlos Negrón, Director of Church Engagement for Missio Nexus, and your host for today's meeting. I'm also joined by mi hermano, Matthew Ellison of 1615 Outfitters. How are you, sir?
Muy bien, amigo. ¿Y tú?
Muy bien, amigo. Muy bien también. I love that. I love the fact that we speak Spanish to each other that way.
Yes.
I love it. Our special guests today are Jeremy Wynn and Will Cassidy of Fellowship Bible Church in Topeka, Kansas. Jeremy and Will are going to be interacting with us on the topic of proactive church-based missionary recruitment and sending. And we thank you for joining us today. And we believe that the content will be timely and helpful to you. If you're in Southern California area, I just want to mention the Nexus SoCal is a one-day in-person event for church mission leaders that will be held in Fountain Valley, California on November 16th. Slots are filling up and we have a limited amount of space. So please make sure you register at missionexus.org/event. And the Nexus might be coming near you this year. So if you're a church mission leader and are interested in hosting the Nexus at your church, or if you have any questions, just please let me know. We want to bring the Nexus to the local church. As we get started with our presentation, remember to please put your questions in the chat panel as you think of them. We have set aside time at the end of the presentation for your questions. And we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. Also, a reminder, please turn your cameras off. It just helps with the flow of what we're trying to bring you guys. So everybody, if you make sure you turn your cameras off. Let me go ahead and introduce our presenters. Jeremy Wynn has served as the outreach and discipleship pastor at Fellowship Bible Church for the past 7 years. He graduated with a BSN from the University of Kansas in 2013 and then received his Master's of Divinity from Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in 2023. Jeremy desires to help mobilize the church to make disciples of Jesus Christ in Topeka and among the nations. And Will Cassidy currently serves as the mobilization chair of Fellowship Bible Church's global outreach team. As mobilization chair, he has co-created the Missionary Pathway, a mobilization strategy and plan, and helped plan a support trip for one of Fellowship Bible Church's partners in the Philippines. Will graduated from the University of Kansas in 2019 with degrees in management and leadership and economics. Upon graduation, he went on staff with a campus ministry, Student Mobilization, and served in Cebu City in the Philippines. Jeremy and Will, welcome to Peer-to-Peer.
Thank you so much, Carlos. Thank you, Matthew. And thank you to all the participants that are joining us for this webinar. Excited to be with you today. And I've had a few changes happen in my house. 13 days ago, we added a new baby girl into our family. It was actually unexpected. It was just one of those where I got a call. There's a little girl at the hospital that needed a family. And we had literally an hour to make a decision. And so I remember getting the call and going home to my wife and being like, hey, what do you think? And we thought and prayed about it very quickly and said yes. And so I'm having a little less sleep these days, but I am excited to be here to be a part of this conversation and glad to have Will here. Will, we're so glad that you're part of this as well.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. I feel really honored to be here. This is a great opportunity. I'm really passionate about what we're getting to discuss today. I don't have anything as crazy going on as like bringing a newborn into my house. I did just move though. So I don't know if that's comparable though. Probably not.
You're engaged.
I am engaged. That's another change. Yeah.
Hey, congratulations. That's
right,
awesome,
man.
But enough about us. Let's get talking about the topic that we have today. And so we're going to be talking about church mobilization and what does it look like to send and recruit when it comes to missionaries. And so through our presentation, as we talk, hopefully there'll be different things that kind of spurs questions that you might have. And so please put those in the chat, and Matthew and Carlos are going to curate those and bring some of the questions at the end. We really would love to have your questions. But where I'm going to begin is just a little bit about our story when it comes to sending. And so, I am excited to share with you our pathway and some of the things that we've learned. But the reality is 7 to 10 years ago, as I started coming within the outreach team in this role, we were in a place where we were very reactive when it came to our church sending. And so we would have people that were passionate about going on the mission field, come to our church, come to me and say, hey, here's the agency I'm going with. Here's the people that I'm called to go. I've been a part of fellowship for a long time. Will you support us? Will you get behind us? And so, I think when I first started, I'm like, well, this is great. God's working in people's hearts. How exciting is this that we're able to then, come alongside them? But we were very reactive within that process. And out of good intentions, what happened is because we didn't have an intentional or proactive pathway, we end up with missed expectations. Sometimes you may have just different philosophies than the sending agency they chose to go with, or maybe you end up having lots of different people wanting to go places and you end up with more of a shotgun approach, or just different things can happen and missed expectations arise. And the reality is the number one source of conflict is missed expectations. And so inevitably, when you have missed expectations about either philosophy of ministry or what care is going to look like or what support's going to look like or what the philosophy is going to be, then you start ending up having hurt within the relationship. And then sometimes you have short-term ministry where maybe someone wasn't given enough care as they were sent out, or maybe enough training or different things. And so they end up having to come home sooner than everyone wanted. And then, like I shared before, ultimately it ends up with hurt. And so literally, this has been, I've had to navigate stories like this. And it just breaks my heart where you have just well-intentioned, passionate people and a church that's well-intentioned, trying to help be a part of the Great Commission. But ultimately you end with heartbreak and hurts and broken relationships. And none of us want that. And so that really led us on a journey to say, hey, God, we want to be a part of the Great Commission. We want to be a part of mobilizing and sending our church, but what can this look like to start to be proactive? And so what you're going to hear hopefully today is more of where we're at and where we're continuing to want to get to, which is where we're proactive, where we have alignment, not only as a church of, hey, here's what our vision is as a church. Here's where our strategic focus is as a church. Here's the countries that we want to be involved in. Here's the unreached people groups. Here's the agencies that align with us philosophically. Here's our core values, but that we have alignment with our missionaries. So we're on the same page as they prepare, as they launch, as they're on field, as they reintegrate throughout the whole process. And ultimately, we want this to be a part of long-term ministry. We don't want this to be a thing where, we're controlling this thing, where we have all the power. And it's not about that. It is about wanting to allow our people to thrive in the field with their people groups, with all the different things they're doing for long term. And that through this whole process, us being proactive, strategic, we have deep relationships. And hopefully I'm telling you, you're going to hear that theme of deep relationships through this whole thing. And so do we have a process? Yes. But our whole process and our prayer and everything that we've done through this is ultimately to try to have deep relationships with our missionaries, and then for our missionaries to have those long-term deep relationships with the people on their field that they're ministering to and they're reaching to. And so our sending journey, it hasn't been all bright spots. It hasn't been all successes and wins. And so as you're listening today, wherever you're at in your own journey, if you're at a place where this is a new concept for you to send people, that's great. We've been there. We're glad that you're just jumping in there. If you've had skin knees and some challenges along the way, yep, we have too. If you're in a place where you've actually done this well and you just maybe wanted to get some sharpened or ideas or maybe reaffirm where you're at, awesome. We're glad you're here as well. Wherever you're at, just understand that there's a piece for you within this journey and this discussion today. Well, before I go to our next topic, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I guess one thing I'll just briefly share is related to my story. Is I was one of those who was sent. You were describing that, like almost the poster child of, they come to Jeremy, they're like, I've been called to go. Will you support me? I've been at FBC, and that was literally me. I walked out of college. I moved back to Topeka, and I was like, I think God has called me to go overseas for a little bit. And the result of that was a lot of what you were describing. And so, and now that's not, no, I'm not putting blame on anybody.
I mean, we got a deep relationship.
We have
we're
a
friends.
deep relationship.
Yeah, we're good.
And it actually was the emphasis on deep relationship, at least for me, that has helped me stay so engaged. I knew I was loved, cared for, valued. That was very evident, and that was so important. But that was also what created for me a passion, was walking out of my own experience and saying, I think that probably where I was, if I could say let down in some ways, was I don't know if I was prepared well by either my sending agency or my church or anybody. For whatever reason, the ball felt dropped. And that was a common experience even among my teammates overseas. And so when I sensed that God was moving me in a different direction, you invited me to join this opportunity to reframe the way that we were thinking about this. Oh man, I was excited about it because I knew that it did have the potential to prevent people from walking into unnecessary hurt. And so I just wanted to, I guess, share that. I'm really, really passionate about this.
Love how God redeems stories, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like a story that could have been just kind of challenging, kind of a negative, man, God's used that to be a passion for you to now be a blessing to those moving forward.
Yeah,
love
absolutely.
that. Okay, so let's just start a little bit with the foundation of why recruit and send. And I know you on here, like this is your heart, but we have to talk about this so we're just on the same page with what we're going through. So a foundational verse for us as a church, but I'm sure you as well, is Revelation 7:9. And Revelation 7:9 says this: after this, I saw a vast crowd, too great to count, from every nation and tribe and people and language, standing in front of the throne and before the Lamb. So this is the picture at the end when we're there with Jesus that we want to be a part of. Like we want to see people from every tribe and nation worshiping Jesus together. And so for us as a church, we want to be a part of that great commission and being able to see all these different people worshiping Jesus together. So we're starting with the end in mind. Like that is the end picture, the end vision that we are excited to work towards and to be a small piece of, as God just does incredible work along the way. But then when we talk specifically about sending and recruitment, a key passage for us is Romans chapter 10, verses 14 through 15. And it says this: how then will they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how are they to believe in him of whom they have not heard? And how are they to hear without someone preaching? And how are they to preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the good news. And so we view ourselves as the church as an extension of living that out. We view that one of our callings as the church is to help recruit and send our people well so that they can be sent and share the good news of the gospel with those that don't have access to the gospel, with those that don't have churches and maybe don't even have scripture in their language yet. It's like we want to be a part of sending and bringing the good news to those who do not have the good news yet. And so as we look also, I'll show a little picture, a little slide of the Joshua Project. And, I know there's some discussion going on about, unreached people groups and what's the best way to actually measure, success or progress, all these types of things. So I'm not showing this to make a statement of like what I view as the best way. All I know is this has historically been something helpful for us. And our heart is, whether it's this map or whatever paradigm you want to look at, man, God sees the whole world and he wants to see every people come to know him. And so on this map, those red dots are going to show places that are unreached, have 2% or less that are believers and maybe aren't able to have their own sustainable church that's multiplying and growing. And so as a church, our focus area within global outreach is India. And you see this map and the whole big red blob is India. And so whether it's partnering with indigenous people within the country or sending our own, and we want to be a part of helping see the unreached be reached with the gospel. But a challenge and a reality that we have currently, I talked about our story of kind of where we've been through our sending process, but a gap that we have is just mobilizing. And so I'll show you a little picture. On the weekend, God has entrusted us with people, which is great, which are priceless, with eternal. And as a missions team, what we want to do is we desire to see the church mobilize to help all people find and follow Jesus. And right now, really, as we look at our global outreach, we've got some good processes, systems, relationships, things. But our gap between the number of people that are coming on a weekend and the number of people that are mobilized and helping send and care and be a part of helping the nations find and follow Jesus, there's a gap there. And so be in prayer for us as a church as we continue to seek wisdom and some best practices to help mobilize the church to be engaged with this. And so that may be your reality as well, but that's our heart. And so we spend a lot of prayer. We spend a lot of energy thinking through, man, how can we continue to mobilize our church in an effective way? Mm-hmm. Okay, now let's talk about recruitment a little bit. Because some of you may be saying, hey, you could have a really cool process and you could have, hey, here's what you're going to do when someone's ready to be sent out. But how do you even know who to send out? And I actually think it doesn't need to be complicated. And I actually think it's not complicated. And so here's kind of a philosophy that we've taken when it comes to recruitment is we look for three different things. So we want to first look at who are those who are already living missionally, right? Like the best predictor of the future is the past. And so if someone is being intentional right now to care for refugees, we have a lot of Ukrainian refugees here in Topeka, Kansas. So are they engaged in that? Are they engaged and intentional in being a part of our global outreach team? Are they intentional in caring for our missionaries that are already being sent? Are they intentional to be in prayer? Are they intentional with their neighbors? Like, do they actively share the gospel here? Because if you're not living it out here, I guess I don't understand what's going to be different when you go to a different context where I feel I haven't been there. You can speak this more to me, but it's going to be even more challenging to share your faith and integrate into culture and there's going to be just barriers along the way. So we're going to be looking for who are those people that are doing it here before we send them there. Well, I guess what would you speak to that and that process? What that's look like?
Yeah, so I think there's two aspects to that. One is like I agree with everything you're saying. It will be harder when you're not in your home culture, when people aren't speaking the same language as you, when you feel more isolated, when you're not as connected, when you don't have the things that like we have the things here that we're familiar with that also just breathe life into our souls that are familiar with us. And then you move overseas, and it's like those don't exist. Like for me, like I love going out. I love to walk and I love to be on the golf course in particular. That doesn't really exist in the Philippines. And even though I'm a terrible golfer, I was even worse then. Like I certainly wasn't doing that there. And so finding things that would be life-giving was very difficult. Now imagine if you're like only engaging in those fun activities here and not doing the missional side of that. I mean, the likelihood of you succeeding there is just difficult.
Yeah.
Now, that being said, I agree with you that the approach is quite simple. These people, at least in my experience, are not very hard to find because they're doing it. If you just look, if you have eyes to see, what they're probably doing is just living faithfully where they are. And then it's a matter of engaging in conversation.
Right. Yep.
And so I don't think that it's coming like down and saying, oh, wow, you're doing this already. Let's send you somewhere else. It's getting to know them, developing deep relationship and seeing where the Spirit of God moves them. If that's into an overseas countercultural context or cross-cultural context, awesome. We'll walk that journey with them. If that's deeper into Great Commission activities here, that's awesome too.
Yeah. Yeah. So we want to see how they're doing it here before they go there. And then we want to see, hey, do they line up with our core values? So as we've went through a missions coaching process with 1615 Outfitters and Matthew Ellison, and again, highly encourage and recommend them and for your church to go through that process. If you don't have a missions vision and mission and values and strategic anchors and all those different things. But for us, our core values are, we want to be intentional. And then we want to have deep relationships, and then we want to be in persistent prayer. And so persistent prayer, I mean, we want to solve problems through prayer. We believe that the first thing that we should do and the best thing that we can do is prayer. And so we're going to look for people that are being intentional, doing it here before they go there. We're looking for people that have deep relationships. We want people that are good at having relationships, that emotional intelligence, that love people, that love their neighbor, and then people that are persistent in the way that they pray. And then finally, Will, you talked about this, man. We have I see in you conversations with them. So we kind of joke that the four most loving letters in the alphabet is I, C, in, N, U, right? So this is where, as you see those people that are living it here, you just say, hey, here's what I see in you. I see in you someone who has a heart for the nations, who has a heart for people, who is faithful to be in prayer and isn't someone that has all the answers. And so we want to invite you to more. We want to invite you to consider what it could look like to be part of a global outreach team or part of a missionary care team, or even we wanted to ask you to consider going on a short-term trip, or even consider going through our pathway and being a missionary yourself. And so I think sometimes, we can fear rejection of, well, if I ask this person, they say no, then, oh man, I failed or whatever. But no, we're just called to make the ask. So as we have eyes that are open and looking for people that are available, I think God can provide some really cool people for us.
Yeah. And one of the things, if I can just jump in really quick, Jeremy, that I loved about the way you process through that those I see in you conversations. I think we want to have wisdom about not only what we see in people clearly, but what we're inviting them into. Yeah. It's likely, it could be, but it's likely not wise to invite somebody who's very loosely involved in church activities, but who you see have one good experience and say, I think that you should go to the mission field in an unreached people group for the next 15 years. That's an unrealistic ask, right? Yeah. And so one of the things, this is actually what we're working on right now as part of our recruitment is, well, how do we have steps for people to take in their journey that make sense, that are not too big, but there's still a stretch. So I think I just wanted to highlight, I think that's really important when we talk about recruitment. Yep. Recruitment does not mean we're trying to get as many people right now onto the field. Recruitment means how do we help people take their next step in engaging in God's work here and across the globe.
Love that. And then we're going to pick up on that theme as we kind of walk through the process as well, because we're thinking through how do we have next steps, not just go to step 10 at the very beginning. So I'm going to just share a little story about what kind of recruitment looked like and even starting to go through the pathway, and we'll jump in and then we'll get to the actual pathway itself. But man, so a couple that's just some of my favorite people and dearest friends, I'm going to call them Team AJ. They've gone to a country in South Asia and going to be general about that. But man, they lived it here before they went there. I mean, they literally live their life in a way that they could be available by God to be used. However, they lived beneath their means. They got technical skills and physical therapy skills, all kinds of skills that could translate to lots of different places to be used for ministry, either here or over there. And they were engaged in our Go team, heavily engaged in our Go team, led perspectives class, just so many things. And as they just went through just their journey and process, they got to a place where they said, hey, we feel like we're called to be sent out, and we want Fellowship to be our sending church. And this was it was at a time when we realized that, man, how we'd been sending was not good, or just it was not getting the results and the relationships and the effectiveness that we wanted. And we got to do something different. And so this couple came at the right time and said, hey, we want to be your pilot to help shift how you do recruitment and sending. And so, man, they helped us not only write this, but like go through it. And now they're on the field and they are doing so. They just had a little kid, and I'm just so thankful for them. They've just been an incredible blessing to help us along the way. So be in prayer for Team AJ as they've been in country now. Man, I'm trying to remember 6 months ish, and they're continuing to get to know culture, language, all the different things. But Will, anything else you'd add to their story before we jump to the pathway?
I think the only thing that I'll add and we've talked a lot about deep relationships. I think one of the things with Team AJ that I love is I hear deep relationship, and I hear that we're in it for the long game.
Yes.
And that's been true. Like I remember when I was like exploring being sent, and I'm like the opposite of Team AJ, right? They were super involved. They were engaged. They were driving all of this. I just showed up, was like, I think you should send me. And so we should follow the Team AJ approach. But what I hear is like they were involved in the long game. FBC as an organization was involved in the long game. That led to a natural depth of relationship that had remarkable amounts of trust, which allowed us to be able to, and this is the hard part about any of this, is we're learning as we go. Right. And so it allowed us to be able to work with them in their literal life experience to help us improve and to help them do it better.
Yeah. It took lots of trust and lots of humility. Yeah. Both ways. Mm-hmm. Love that. Okay. Well, let's jump into the pathway itself. So in your chat in the notes, there should be a link to, I think, a PDF or a document that's going to show you what our pathway looks like. But here's the deal: before Will starts going through it, I mean, you guys are welcome to take this, use it as a template, whatever you want to do. But I really would encourage you, take it as a template, but make it your own. God has uniquely placed your church in a specific place and calling you to specific places, and has unique relationships and partners and maybe relationships with sending organizations, all those types of things. So allow this to make it your own. This is not like the way to do it. This is the current version that we have that we're doing. So take what you like about it, but then feel free, make it your own. Highly encourage that. Okay, Will, talk to us about the pathway.
Yeah. So the pathway has been an iterative process over the course of a couple of years. But I specifically remember that, and this, I think we could even, if you want to pull it back to the recruitment process, this was, you specifically invited me in to help with this process. So I think that's another thing to note, is giving people opportunities to step into it. But I think what's important to note about the pathway is our purpose statement right at the top. Like, that's one of the things we have to highlight. And so our purpose statement, it reads, to provide clarity and structure to you, the missionary candidate, as you walk through this journey, and to deepen your relationship with Fellowship Bible Church as we partner together. So there's basically 2 points to this. One is providing clarity and structure, because this can be an overwhelming process. Mm-hmm. In fact, it almost certainly will be, as you prepare to uproot your life into another country.
And I feel like clarity is kindness.
Yes.
I don't mean for clarity and structure to be restrictive. Yes. I mean for it to be kind and helpful.
Yes.
So we can be on the same page.
It absolutely is. Clarity is kindness in really any scenario, but especially one with so much gray area and so much unknown. Yeah. Like you say, our structure, even if we call it that, is really like very loose guidelines. It's like train tracks to kind of run on, but you're kind of determining even how they go.
Yeah.
But then again, you're just noticing deep relationship is what we care about. We're convinced that when we deepen our relationships with our missionary partners, it's going to help us love them better. They're going to feel more love. They're going to be more empowered, more enabled to stay on the field and do the work that they've been called to do. Yeah.
Love it.
Okay. So if that's the purpose, then we need to get into the actual process itself. And so if we move on to the next part, we have 4 phases in our pathway. And the first phase is interest. And so you can see on the screen there on the slide, this is where candidates express an initial interest. And so this can be in a variety of ways, right? Just like we've talked about. This could be an I see in you conversation where we're inviting somebody to consider something. And then maybe in prayer, they're saying, wow, okay, I do think I could explore this. Or this could be somebody coming to us already and saying like, okay, I think I'm called. And here's what I think is really interesting. This is an interest stage, or kind of a pre-exploration stage for both the candidate and for Fellowship Bible Church. It goes both ways. And that's really important. And so some of the key things in this that you'll notice in our pathway that we included are, 1, it starts with conversation. So we're coming back to relationship constantly. We're starting with a conversation with our global outreach team lead and with our outreach coordinator. We're inviting them into deeper participation if they're not already doing that. So if they're not involved in our global outreach team meetings, we want them to be a part of those team meetings, because those are going to be a lot of their, whether it's support or even just networking opportunities to get connected with other folks in the church who are passionate about this work. And then there are a couple other things we encourage, whether it's perspectives or some other kind of learning. We just think it's really valuable.
Just getting exposure.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
Just understanding God's heart for the nations, just having a firm why.
Yeah.
As you then kind of go into the next phases. So important.
So important. And that's something like, whether or not you're called to be an overseas missionary, I think is so valuable. That's something that our global outreach team was putting together recently, was whether it was perspectives or another class or conference they went to, it almost always, there was some light bulb moment that happened as they were exposed to the heart of God for the world that said, oh my gosh, I want to be involved in this too.
Yeah.
And then the last thing that you'll see there is an evaluation of how they're currently involved. And this is really for us to be able to say, okay, like Jeremy was saying earlier, we're wanting to see, okay, is this somebody who's actively serving? Do they line up with our core values? Again, it goes back to that. This is going both ways in terms of the interest stage. So anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think one thing I'll add is kind of just practically how this goes out is if it's kind of a homegrown person and they understand our pathway and they understand the process and they've seen people go through it, then this is no surprise to them. But if they're not fully aware of that, then they may be coming, and I know you explain it more in like what we would say is phase 2 or 3, and saying, hey, I've got this agency, I've got this place where you wanted to go. And it feels like an awkward conversation to say, hey, we actually need you to go backwards. And also it can feel like, oh man, like God's moving in this person and we should say yes. And why would I not want to help be part of sending somebody? And I just want to encourage all of you that every time that we have decided to go slower rather than faster, and I'm a person that goes fast, that is absolutely who I am. But every time that we've decided to go slower and invest more in relationship and training and be involved for the long term, it has paid off every time. And so it is a tough and an awkward conversation. I've had lots of them to say, hey, God may have called you, and man, this may be where you go. If you want fellowship to be your sending church, this is the pathway. Again, guidelines, we'll tailor it, we'll tweak it for them, but you're going to need to slow down, and it's going to be a longer process than you were probably originally planning. And so I would just lean in and just be okay with that, because we're not focused on the short term. We are focused on the long term. And I just believe that the extra relationship, the extra equipping, the extra preparation really is what's needed for long term on the field ministry.
Yeah, I totally agree. And so I think the last thing to know, because this is like the transition between phase 1 and phase 2, is that nothing's been decided in this phase. The missionary candidate hasn't officially even maybe said like, I am going. At this point, we are purely conducting interest. We're evaluating one another.
There's no expectation.
No expectation, no pressure.
Either way.
It's just a conversation. If what the decision is at the end of this phase is, okay, actually not now, or maybe not ever, that's fine. In fact, that's great. We would rather know that now rather than send you and maybe you shouldn't have been and end up with a lot of hurt. So with that, then we move on to exploration and commitment, which is phase 2. And this is where things start to get a little bit more serious. This is where, we commit, as I became familiar with recently.
I was going to say, like, is phase 1 kind of dating and then phase 2 is engagement?
Yeah, I haven't thought about it that way, but I guess, yeah. So I think I just did phase 2 of the relationship pathway, if we could call it that. Oh gosh, I shouldn't make jokes off the cuff. But yes, phase 2, exploration and commitment. So this is where things start to get a little bit more serious. And so this is from both our side and from their side. And so as we start looking for the missionary candidate to get a little bit more serious, there are a couple of things that we see as being really valuable. One of those is getting some sort of experience internationally. And so this could be like an in-depth training program. Like I know Team AJ did a year-long training program in another country that was awesome. And that really helped them both figure out what they're like, okay, this is what we want to do, gave them skills. That was fantastic. This could be a variety of short-term trips. This could be going to like an actual training center still in the States. There's a whole bunch of ways you could do this, but we want people to have some sort of a preparation so that they can begin to have right expectations for what their experience could be on the field. There's no way to 100% predict what they're going to experience, but there are things that we can anticipate. And this is where I think too, we want to lean on the value, the expertise that our sending agency partners have. We as a church are not experts on what the experience is on the field. And so we want to lean on the experts in those fields in order to prepare the candidate together. Another part of this is financial training and support raising training. This is really important. I know that we talked about missed expectations and hurt brings people off the field. So does finances. And so some of this is like financial literacy 101 as like a business person. That's really important. Like, do you know how to balance a checkbook? Do you budget? Do you spend within your means, stuff like that? But also support raising can be a beast. And it can be really hard. So we want to make sure that people have training, whether that's books, you can actually go to different trainings. We have some recommended for folks that we've seen be helpful.
Because we really believe that fundraising is a mobilization tool.
Yes.
It's a way to invite people to have a part to play in helping reach the nations. And so, some people fundraising isn't overwhelming, but for a lot of people, it feels daunting and it feels like a chore to get over there. And so, yes, we want to give them the skills and the tools to be able to execute it. we want them to have a heart of just a compelling why of how they're going to use this as a way to actually mobilize our church as their fundraising.
Yeah.
And so we want to make sure that's a priority.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And the other thing I'll say, and this can be difficult even on the other side of having done some fundraising, is the importance of letting people struggle through this. It is really hard.
Yeah.
But candidly, if you can't have conversations around what God is calling you to do and what you need from others to partner in you with that. I know finances are hard, especially in America, given our culture, but if you can't have that conversation, it's going to what is the likelihood that you can have a conversation with somebody who's not from your culture, who maybe has never heard about Jesus, and you're going to invite them to start following a Middle Eastern man who died a couple thousand years ago in his teachings? The likelihood of that is quite low, right? And so even just from a character training ability, I found it incredibly helpful for myself, and I know others who that's been true as well. It got them comfortable having uncomfortable conversations.
Yep.
Okay. So another part of this is we want to get elder board approval on anybody that we send. And this is also just so obviously we trust our elders. And so we want their input into helping us to evaluate, is this candidate ready? And is this somebody that Fellowship Bible Church wants to partner with for a significant amount of time? Because we want to have deep relationships. We take approving somebody, I think, really seriously, because this is a serious deal. And this is their lives that are at stake, is us giving our stamp of approval. Is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, because this is really important for me. I mean, all of it's important, but this one's definitely important. Your church structure could have a lot of different ways. For us, we are an elder-led church. And so there's kind of two elements when it comes to approval for a candidate. When it comes to field readiness, do we feel like they have the skills and ability and stuff to be able to make it on the field, and how do they handle suffering, and just a lot of these different things we have a outreach stewardship team that helps evaluate and have that conversation. For the elders, what they evaluate is character and then theological preparedness. So because if we're basically sending out a church planter, we want to make sure that church planter is elder qualified from a character level as well as a theological level. And so we take it very seriously. And so if they aren't there at a character level, that's okay. That's a major red flag. But if they're not prepared at theological level, we actually have developed our own training to then actually walk them through training, or we can help send them places as well. But we need them to not only be field ready, character ready, but also theologically ready, as they're going to be sharing the gospel and answering theological questions overseas.
Yeah. Love that. And so at this point, they have elder board approval. And again, it's almost is never going to be as clean as it sounds in this pathway process. But for the sake of us thinking through it, it's helpful to do it this way. At this point, they've gotten elder board approval. Everything's green. And so we're moving forward, and we move into preparation stage. And preparation stage is, honestly, it's a lot of what we just talked about in terms of getting ready, doing the trainings, raising support. But you're just doing it instead of getting you ready to do it. And so this is a stage where we're allowing the candidate to figure out how this is going to work for them, and then taking the steps to get them ready to go. Now, part of what this looks like is hopefully if they have been walking through this process with us, then they're going to be selecting an agency at this point. We would love to be a part of that conversation with them, because these are really important relationships. I know we view our relationships with the agencies as we're all partnering together in support of this individual or their family. And so we don't want to be contrarian in any way with the agencies or with the missionary candidates that we're working with. That's not our goal. Our goal is the glory of Jesus across all of the world. We're on the same team. Yeah. Right.
And with agencies, we want to have theological alignment. We want to have philosophical alignment, and then just civility. How do we relate alignment? Of those three, the main one that has typically been a stumbling block is philosophy. And so that, for me, it's not personal. There are great agencies out there that are wonderful sending people. They just don't fit with our philosophy of how we're wanting to send. And so that's why we want to be aligned on those things, so that when things get challenging on the field, the agency and us are on the same page. Here's what you're going to do. Here's what we do. Here's what the missionary does. Here's how we work together, and we're not bonking heads at all.
Yeah, I love that. So there's two other things I want to call out when we think about the preparation stage. I hope we're not going into too much detail, but I'm going to keep going.
We got about 5 more minutes, so
we can do that.
Yep.
One is recruiting a care team. This is something that is honestly somewhat new in our approach, but we recognized that there was a gap in our care for our missionaries once they were overseas. But we also recognized that it was not reasonable to have the pastoral staff be the ones who are constantly caring in every single way for all the needs of the missionary candidates. And so
we want to give more people in our church opportunities to be involved. And also sometimes it's easier to talk to a lay leader than it is the pastor, or whatever.
Absolutely. And so one of our requirements before sending somebody is that they have a care team. And so this involves inviting a care team leader and then them filling out that care team. But that care team can look like whatever the candidate wants it to look like. If they want to do a monthly check-in, they can do that. If they want to do, hey, we just want quarterly check-in, they can do that. We've had care teams that have actually gone and visited our missionary candidates, which has been so appreciated if they're able to do that. They will sometimes send like Christmas cards, which are really loved and treasured, especially by the families whose kiddos are also working through the cross-cultural adjustment. And so I would encourage you, the care team is huge. And then included in this as well is choosing where they're going. There's a pretty good chance at this point they have already done that, but if they haven't, or throughout this process, I know for us, India is our focus area. And so we at least invite everybody to consider India, given the way that God has put India on our heart in this church. Anything else you want to add in preparation?
Nope, it's good.
Okay. Then the last phase is appointment. And so really the appointment stage it's kind of like the sending stage too. And so this is us making sure all of our boxes checked? Are all of your boxes checked? Have you done everything that you need on our end? Have you gotten a care team established? Do you have your support raised? Have you done everything that the agency requires of you? And then we will have a commissioning service to send them out. But one of the
commissioning services.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you want to talk about that at all? Or?
Sure. I mean, the commissioning service is it's the culmination of everything. And as a church family, we're able to, just share the vision of what they're doing and just pray over them. The care team comes up on the stage for each of the services. We all lay hands on them, and it allows the church body just to be a part of this, and for the missionaries to know that their church family is behind them. As they've gone through this process, they know that the elders are behind them, the missions team's behind them, the pastors are behind them, and then this commissioning, their church is behind them. Yeah. And so, man, we want to give our best to help send them well.
Yeah, absolutely. And then alongside that, and this is likely happening with the care team, but we want to have a plan before they're sent for what ongoing support and communication is going to look like. We want them to be aware of how often they can expect to hear from us, how often they want us reaching out to them. And this will inevitably change when they get on the field and start actually walking through the experiences. But being able to think about that on the front end allows us to be proactive about those conversations. Yeah. And then finally, the last thing we actually have are initial conversations about reentry. This, I think, is something that is going to change person to person, depending on what their commitment is and what kind of how long they're planning to be overseas. But I think the reason we wanted to include it here was because we just don't want to drop the ball on it. Mm-hmm. Bringing people back off of the field, whether it's early, whether it's on time, or even if they've been there longer, is a unique experience for everybody going through it. And so we want to, anything that has the potential to be hard, right? We want to be on the front end of anticipating that and talking it through with people.
That's right.
Yeah.
Love it.
Great.
All right. We're going to go to some next steps, and then we'll wrap up before we go to the Q&A section. So let me begin by just saying the best next step I think any and all of us can do is prayer. Again, I know I talked about this before, but we believe that the best thing that we can do and the most that we can do is pray. And so wherever you're at in your journey, I know Will and I, we just shared a lot with you. And so my fear is that some of this may be overwhelming to you. And so just don't allow, if it feels overwhelming, to just kind of be hey, I'm not going to do anything. Man, just start wherever you're at. and begin in prayer and say, God, where would you have me start? Am I going to be looking for a will to invite me to help think through this process? Do I already have people that I need to have a conversation with? I just begin in prayer and allow the Spirit to show you what that next step needs to look like. Also invite you to clarify your church missions team's vision and focus area. If you haven't done this, again, 1615 Outfitters, great organization to begin and help you think through and get this set up, because your recruitment and sending process is a piece of the puzzle that fits within that overarching strategy. So if you haven't done that, man, have that be your next step. Develop your missionary pathway. You've got a template here. Welcome to use that, tweak that, whatever. But just begin being proactive as you think about how you and your church wants to uniquely recruit and send. And then finally, man, this has been huge for us. I mean, get coaching and help when you are stuck. I'm not going to say if, I'm saying like when. Like, none of us have all these answers. Like there's not a, hey, here's the perfect play that you should run. And so whether it's, again, 1615, whether it's Missio Nexus or maybe partners they have, or another group that I've been super impressed with is a group called Upstream Ministries. I was at the Missio Nexus conference, and if you haven't gone, I encourage you to go to that next year. That's a good time every year. But there are cohorts of different churches that are trying to think through how are they going to develop their missionary pathway, and Upstream actually helps facilitate those cohorts. And so, to be honest, if I had known about Upstream or groups like that when we were going through our process, I would have been like, hey, Will, let's be part of this cohort instead of us kind of, trying to figure it out on our own. So know that there are groups available to help you. That is the beauty of Missio Nexus. Like, they have networks and partners that you can tap into, so that you're not alone as you go through this journey. Okay, we're going to wrap up our part there, but we look forward to hearing some of the questions that you guys have and having some discussion over that.
Well, brothers, always a pleasure to get to interact with you. And I feel especially blessed because I had a front row seat to the journey that you've been on over several years, not only the formation of vision and strategy, but watching this pathway develop. And so it has been really beautiful to watch God mobilize your church. And I wanted to say thank you. Not only is God using you to mobilize fellowship, but now he's using you to mobilize other churches. And so thank you for your generosity, big time. Listen, I want to remind everyone who's on the call today that this is your time to enter into the dialogue with these two brothers. And so if you've not put any questions in the chat box, now is the time to do so. And while that is populating, I have a question for you guys. Jeremy, you mentioned that the pathway grew out of the larger vision, like it's a piece of a larger vision and strategy. And I think for some folks on the call, they may not have that kind of church-based larger vision. They just want to send. And so you keep using these words, deep relationship. I know that's one of your overarching values for your outreach efforts. Talk to us about how you cultivated these values that really got people in your church looking outward. Because, I think without that, you might get people once in a while who are saying, hey, I want to go. They're coming forward and saying, will you support me? But there's something different happening in fellowship. There is a vision for the nations that people are being pulled into it. How do you cultivate that?
Okay, let me talk about how we identified it, and then I can talk about how to cultivate it. We'll tag team this. So when it comes to a core value, you need to have a value that has been true about you for a long time. Like, if you just say, hey, this sounds like a really cool value that I want to have, but it's not actually who you are, I think people are going to struggle to buy into that because they're like, okay, that sounds cool, but that's not actual. So you need to have something that's an actual core value that you can continue to build upon. And then the other thing is, like, when you say, hey, deep relationships is a core value of ours, that means that we are going to be like as or more committed to that core value than any other, church organization out there, unless if it's their core value also. So it's basically like, we are not going to compromise this, and we're going to elevate this maybe over other really good things, but it's going to be like our focus. And when we think about deep relationships, a key element of that is a mutually beneficial relationship and transformation. So like when we're working with a missionary or a partner, we don't view ourselves as the expert, as the savior, as better than anything like that. We don't view it as like, hey, we've got all this stuff to offer. Like, you should come to us and we'll give you the answers. We view it as, hey, we are in this together, and we're going to learn together, and we're going to celebrate your wins. You're going to celebrate ours, man. We're going to pray with you. You're going to pray with us. Like, we're going to be there even when it's challenging, all these types of things. We're going to learn from you, and hopefully you're going to learn from us. And like, it's mutual, and a lot of humility along the way. I think also another way you can cultivate relationships is vulnerability. And so I think in those hard conversations and hard things, being vulnerable and okay with that, like, just, if you're having a conversation with someone that you don't feel like is ready, like, just say, hey, I feel, I had one of these conversations. I just went into it being like, hey, I feel uncomfortable and awkward, and just I feel some unease coming into this conversation because I care about you, I love you, and I want to see you be used for God's glory, but I just don't feel like you're ready, and I don't feel like it'd be the best and wisest thing to send you right now. And I feel awkward saying that and sharing that with you, but like, I really in my heart feel like that's what's best for you. And just kind of admitting that, I think, kind of helps diffuse it. And instead of them like getting defensive, being like it's us versus them, being like, oh, okay, like they're kind of speaking to how we're feeling right now. Or, if they're on the field and maybe marriage is tough and really going well, instead of being like, hey, like, what's the deal? Like, you are a missionary. Like, you should have this like thought through, like, do you follow Jesus? Being like, listen, marriage is tough for me here in the US, and I have my family close. Like, I know the language, like I've got lots of resources around me, and you guys don't have that. Like, it makes sense why you're navigating these challenges and having challenges in your marriage. Now, I'm not okay with you sitting in that, but like, there's grace that this is where you're at, and let's help work through this together. And so I think just having vulnerability be a core part of your relationship is just going to cultivate that trust, and is going to help you in the midst of some of the tougher decisions and discussions.
Yeah, I think if I can just add really quickly, I guess personal anecdote about how Fellowship Bible Church did this really well was when my team came back from the Philippines shortly after COVID. Basically, our whole team said, we're not emotionally healthy. We need some space. And then we were going to go back, and there's a whole long story about what that looked like. But I remember about a month before we came back, I went on a call with you, Jeremy, and I said, I'm not healthy. Yeah. I'm hurting. I'm struggling. I'm doubting. And I think I need to see a counselor, but I don't even know where to go. Like, help. And I remember you met me with love, kindness, compassion, directed me to a counselor that was really beneficial for my health. And it was that experience that actually allowed some of the hurt of a really difficult situation that wasn't even necessarily Fellowship's issue. Like, it wasn't their fault that the world shut down while I was overseas. But that allowed me to be able to have, I think, a quicker turn on, like what you were saying earlier, that redemptive purpose. And it was through the deep relationship that I knew I was known and loved, but also being called into something greater. Yeah. And so I just wanted to share that even on the call. Like, there's always good to be done by extending love toward the individual.
Yeah. That's good.
Hey, Leah asks, did you choose a strategic focus for India before having anyone in the pipeline? Were you more specific toward a certain people group or region within India? So two-part question.
That's a great question. I will answer it, but I'm not saying that my answer is like the perfect way to do it, because I'm actually not even sure it is. Okay, so when we went through our strategic vision process to help think through that, one of the, Matthew came up with this word. We looked for, hey, what are some divine serendipities that are happening that are like unique ways that God was moving in our church before the process that could help give us wisdom and guidance on what our focus should be. And actually in Topeka, Kansas, where we live, like, there were literally hundreds of families from India, and even more specifically, a part in Southeast India. And several of them already started coming to our church and things like that. And then we had an incredible partner from the exact same city and region where these families were already from. And then in addition to that, as we looked at, Joshua Project and just lots of different things, it just was like, this makes sense. So like this should be a place that we can be engaged and we can be involved in, because we have opportunities to be engaged with India here, and we have opportunities to be engaged with India there, and strategically it's in the 1040 window and all those types of things. Now, India is massive. It's huge. If you wanted to be like much more focused with India, that I would probably highly support that. Now, we just have had a pretty diverse portfolio when it comes to our partners in India that happen to be in lots of different places. So we have one indigenous partner that's highly involved in church planning and in more the lower caste and poor and vulnerable. And then we have another group that works with vulnerable children and families in specific ways. And then we have another partner that works with more the higher caste. And then as we're sending people through our pipeline, people that are very specifically working with unreached people groups. So I think how our journey is unfolded, we kind of look at it more as a diversified portfolio than we do like a specific geographic area. But man, if your church chose to do that, I think that's extremely wise.
Yeah, what you mentioned there, that idea of divine serendipities, we do this environmental scan, and I think every church should do this. Where is God already moving? What are our existing connections? Are there unusual, open doors or windows of opportunity that just seem to be unusual? And you scratch your head and say, how did this happen? So I would encourage anyone to do that as you think about where you're going to focus. Brothers, here's a real specific question. How did you identify your agency partners? I know you mentioned philosophy already, but maybe you can unpack that in a little more detail.
Okay, so first thing I'd say is, so on the missionary pathway, there's a front and a back. And so the front is the process, and the back, I believe, it's kind of an appendix with some additional resources. So on there, we have listed different missionary agencies that are like pre-approved, you're good to go. Now, I mean, if you go to the Missio Nexus conference, there's, lots and lots of agencies. So what we are not saying that, hey, these are the only ones we'll work with. We're just saying, hey, if it's one of these, you're good to go. And then if it's a different one, then we're excited to have a conversation about that. Like, for example, the agency that Team AJ chose was not actually one that was on our radar. But then as we learned about the agency and got to know them, we're like, this is a phenomenal agency. I'm so glad that you got us networked with them. Mm-hmm. And so again, for us, theologically, we got to be aligned theologically, because what they're sharing overseas just needs to align with us as a church theologically. Philosophically, it needs to be aligned. And I can get more specific if you want me to, but just the practice of our strategy, how we think through our year, our month, like what our first steps are, how much are we going to prioritize language and culture, how much are we going to prioritize focusing on unreached people groups or church planning versus disciple making, like making sure we're aligned on our philosophy. And then just civility, like making sure like I enjoy working with you and having a conversation with you, so that when a potentially an emergency comes up, like you and I trust each other going into the conversation. So that's how we look. The ones that are listed there, man, 3 for 3 on all those. And then as others get brought to us, then we are very open to adding them to the list.
So you hit on this a little bit when you talked about that deep relationship value, but I'd like you to go a little further if I could. When you've had to meet with someone and they're not ready, and so there's a redirection, there's a referral. Can you walk through that in a little more detail? What does that look like?
Yeah. Man, okay. It's so case by case. So, okay. So let's say it's a training thing. Let's say they're not ready from a train. Okay. So I think they might not be ready from either a training perspective, a character perspective, or a theological perspective. Okay. So if they're not ready from a character perspective, man, we're having a whole different conversation. Like we're not even talking about missions right now. We're talking about like, hey, let's talk about you and Jesus right now. And like, it's more of a discipleship, and like, we're going to walk with you, but man, that's what we got to focus on. If it's theological, then you can train theology, right? Like you can give them theological training, equipping, whether it's through things we have in-house, seminary, all that kind of stuff. And then if it's like more practical things, then that's where we want them to just get more experience, whether that's with like a radius, with a radical, whether that's going with one of our partners for 3 months, something like that. And to be honest, most of the time it's like they already have chosen their agency and they're already far down the road. And we're saying, hey, we need you to come back. And maybe their agency doesn't require as much training and preparation. and we just say, hey, we're not comfortable with that. So usually we can provide them the next steps they need. It's just going to take longer than they had planned and they had expected, and so they've just got to reset their expectations. That's typically what it is. Again, if it's theology, we can work through that. If it's character, I mean, we're totally pausing the missionary pathway conversation. So
absolutely. So it's situational in a lot of ways.
Totally
some
situational.
languages I used to use, Jeremy, when I was a missions pastor. I was 10 years as a missions pastor as well. In fact, that was the incubator for 1615. But I would often say, we love you too much to see you go to the field ill-prepared. We love you too much to see you go without the confirmation and affirmation of the leaders of this church. And we love missionaries too much. We love the work too much. So that's often some helpful language as well. And sometimes it's just a redirect, there's some training that's needed, et cetera. But that's some helpful language. I've got one more question, and then I'm going to ask you guys for parting comments of wisdom for our audience. So this question is regarding developing and sending missionaries. For churches that have limited staff, which things would you say are best for the church to handle, and what tasks can be handled by other orgs? So put the small church hat on if you can. I know you guys are a part of a big church, but what might that look like?
Are you going to answer this? Because I mean, you're a lay leader and not on staff and stuff. Like, how would you respond to that?
So it's a really, really good question. I'm going to try not to fumble too much as I externally process. I think what I would say when I think about like how we put the missionary pathway together, there's very little in our pathway that is dependent upon our church being of a significant size. There are resources, of course, that come internally that are perhaps I even take for granted, being a part of a larger church. But when I think about the process of recruiting and sending a potential missionary candidate, when it comes to identifying somebody who is living a Great Commission lifestyle in the present, that's not dependent on anything that the church is like doing. That's dependent on them seeking Jesus with their whole heart and loving their neighbor as themselves, right? If they're doing that, that is Great Commission living right there where they are. When it comes to developing a deep relationship with somebody, that may be more difficult if there's a limited pastoral staff due just simply to time constraints, but it's not impossible. And so I would say that when I would emphasize the relationship part from your church perspective, and then allow the other organizations, whether that is on the field training, sending agency, sending preparation, financial support preparation, allow them to be the experts in what they're doing. We're doing that too.
Yeah. I would just say as like a general mantra, like focus on doing what you can and not what you can't.
Yeah, that's really good.
Like, I think it can be easy to be like, oh, well, I can't do that. I can't do that. That won't work for us. But focus on what you can do and begin there. So again, we all can pray, like whatever size church you have. And then we all can be focused on having deep relationships and then developing as intentional a process as makes sense.
Yeah.
I feel like small church, big church, like, that doesn't matter. It's like, are we being healthy and are we being obedient? And so if you're a smaller church, I think an advantage you have is your whole church can know who your missionary is.
Yeah.
Your whole church will have like known them personally. Their kids, we're kids with like, you have kids the same age, like you grew up with them. They were, serving on different ministries. Like, them, like everyone knows them. In a larger church, you have to kind of be like, hey, remember who this person was? And, it's just, you can feel more removed, but a smaller church, I think you have unique advantages as well. It's just pros and cons. That's how I view it.
I agree.
Yeah. I'm going to throw my 2 cents in. It may only be worth 2 cents, but I'm going to put it in. Okay. Even though you have a large church with a lot of paid staff, volunteers are the engine of your missions ministry.
100%.
And so volunteers can happen in big or small churches. It's possible in both situations. Okay, brothers, what's your last comment? We're going to bring Carlos on. Give us some final parting comments here. Carlos, join us. Come on, brother. There he is.
I'm right here.
Yeah, let us hear from you guys. What do you have to say to the group?
I don't think I've got anything more new to say, so I'll just kind of just reiterate what's already been said. Like, yeah, just start somewhere. Wherever you're at in your journey, I'm excited for each one of you as you pray and discern what your next step looks like within this. And thank you for your heart and for being available to even be a part of this and to listen to us talk for an hour. And so God's going to use your faithfulness as you just are obedient to take a next step, whether that's praying, whether that's getting coaching from someone, whether that's inviting someone else to be a part of a leadership team with you, whether it's looking out to have those I see in you conversations. Like, God is going to use your faithfulness. It may take longer than you want. It may look different than you planned, but just be faithful with whatever that next step needs to look like for you and your church family.
I love the fact that you have emphasized so much. I'm sorry, I know you're probably, but I love the fact that you have emphasized so much the need to pray.
Yeah.
I thank you for that.
Brothers,
I don't know if I
you're
have much to
blessing.
add either.
Well, you guys did a great job. Thank you so much again for your generosity, for sharing your learning with the larger body of Christ. May your tribe increase. May God bless you guys big time.
Amen.
Thank you so much.
Amen. No. We want to thank you. We want to thank you, Jeremy and Will, for your presentation, for being with us, for giving us the time. And I know that your experience, I was actually a couple of weeks ago, I believe it was last week or a couple of weeks ago, I was doing a workshop and I asked Matthew to actually just kind of speak a little bit about you guys and what God has done, the Holy Spirit has done in your church, because I think it's amazing. I think it's wonderful. And thank you, Matthew, for sharing that with that group of people that we were with. So I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Well, we hope you are blessed by what you heard today. To learn more about the ministry of 1615 and how we serve churches, simply log on to 1615.org. And by the way, don't forget to like and subscribe.